Hey, what's up guys, Sir Emanon here, and welcome to another deck profile on the channel today. So this is going to be for Fam Nights for January 2021. And this is going to be the culmination and results of my testing for Road to 1000 Olympic rating. If you guys have not seen those episodes where I kind of take the deck and play it in action, definitely go ahead and find the link to that playlist in the description box below or in the top right corner of the screen for you guys if you have not caught up already. But this is, as per usual, going to be a live deck building session where I start off with an empty template here and then just kind of go through the cards individually. I think it just makes a lot of sense to sort of see the thought process as we kind of just talk through the choices here. But if you guys do enjoy this deck profile and want to see a combo tutorial video, definitely leave, let's go for 150 likes in the video. I know you guys can do that. And I'll go for a very detailed combo tutorial this time around. So if that's something that's interesting to you guys, then I will go ahead and do that. But without further ado, guys, let's go ahead and get started. So generally, I like to begin these videos with a little bit of theory and just some general context if you guys are interested in that, and also want maybe a little bit of a primer on the deck, if you will. So if you guys are unfamiliar with Fam Knights, basically the general idea is that they're a combo-centric deck with a lot of graveyard tools at their disposal. They're known for just being able to grind really, really well, and they excel at board building. They play a lot of extenders and can usually chew through disruptions quite well. The deck also is quite an aggressive one, basically being able to pump out a lot of link materials, like seize materials, and just be able to sort of combat whatever your opponent has throwing at you. And this version of the deck is very much focused on Cherry Beanie line specifically, so it's going to be more of a 3-axis build, if you will. This is a list that was initially inspired by Joshua Oosters. I will leave a link to his YouTube channel down in the description box below. He's very much a PK enthusiast and is a very, very accomplished player, so shout out to you if you're watching this. But yeah, this is very much going to be inspired initially off of his list, and then I sort of tried to deviate a little bit just to have a little bit more of an approach because obviously his list is out there if you guys would like to look at that. But for some strengths of the deck, basically it is a very, very high ceiling and very adaptable combo deck in that you can really choose to kind of play the deck based on what your matchup demands. So you have a lot of different avenues to kind of flex into various link monsters. The nightmares come to mind. You can also make various end boards between like Appaloosa, Dragoon, Evil Swarm, Nightmare, things of that nature. And it's really, really strong against just a lot of the combo-oriented decks in particular. But even against backward decks, it has enough disruptions to where you can really tailor the deck to certain matchups. Like, for example, you have Dragoon to negate spells and traps if need be, or just the Rusty Pop on your opponent's turn, which comes up quite a lot. So those are things that the deck has access to, which is just kind of a toolbox of just a plethora of different options available, which is very, very nice. The combos are also non-linear, meaning that even though there's a subset of combos that you should be aware of and that you should try to kind of follow as a baseline template, you can definitely deviate based on how your opponent decides to interrupt you and how you want to break your opponent's board as well, going second, for example. So that's like a really strong component of the deck. The next thing is that it is very, very strong, as I mentioned, in the grind game and the recursive aspects. So because all the Fam Knights effectively obviously float, you're going to have a strong resource pool to where if your board gets broken, it's actually not the end of the world because you can do things like on your opponent's end phase, banish Fog Blade to bring back Rusty, and then trigger a potential Torn Scaling Graveyard to set up for next turn. So even if it might look like you are running low on resources, your opponent also has to be wary of what they leave in your graveyard, because if left unattended, you can really just easily pick up where you left off and try and go for the OTK the next turn. The third thing is, speaking of OTKs, the fact that this deck can really just end games on a dime if need be, between things like Access Code, or if you want to play Borosword, for example, or Dragoon. These are all very aggressive and offensive options that you can use to try to reduce your opponent's life points to 0. It's very, very plain and simple. This deck excels, again, at just chewing through various disruptions and just excels at being able to put on the pressure very, very fast. And finally, the coolest thing about this deck is, well, not the coolest thing necessarily, but one of the cool things about the deck is that it has the space to incorporate different defensive cards. So you can think of like hand traps or flex spots like Cosmic Cyclone or Forbidden Droplet. Or you can play some of what are traditionally sided cards in the main as well if you want to have a specific meta call. And I really like decks that can play somewhat of a contained engine, or even if it's not a contained engine, one that's redundant enough to where if you just draw a certain amount of cards, you can reserve the rest of the spaces for hand traps, and that is something that this deck definitely can provide. And then for some of the weaknesses of the deck, because of course every deck has a weakness, right? First off, the format this or this current format rather has a lot of graveyard hate in particular. You can think of things like Skullmeister, Ghost Spell, Ice Dragon's Prison, Call by the Grave, Walkero, even like the Fringe DD Crow, for example. There's a lot of things that can really disrupt your plays if you're not careful. So you have to be extremely cautious and mindful of the fact that because of the other decks that are existing in the format, for example, Drytron, Virtual World, and Eldritch, there's going to be a lot of cards that are incidentally good against your deck as well. You can also extend this to maybe like side deck hate, for example. Lancia really does hurt. And so definitely need to kind of be mindful of the fact that you're going to run into instances where you kind of take the residual damage, if you will. The second is the fact that there are Garnets in this deck, which, is kind of just the result of playing the Dragoon package, but needs to be said that you will open some wonky hands some of the time. Granted, the deck is still relatively consistent because all you really need is a certain amount of starters and or extenders to really play the game, but that being said, those Garnets can get in the way of you being able to end on your ideal board. And then finally, and the most importantly, is that this deck is really, really hard to play. Throughout my 6 games of testing or 6 matches of testing in this series alone, I found out and I learned a lot from when I initially started playing this deck. And it was really, really fun. It was super rewarding to play when I, started figuring out like the combo lines and doing all this stuff. But this deck is not for the faint of heart. It is very, very hard to play. But that being said, again, if you do manage to outwit your opponent and manage your resources correctly, do all that good stuff, it can reap very, very much a lot of benefits in the long run. So without further ado, guys, let's just go ahead and now move into the deck profile itself. So I'm going to be doing this a little bit differently, not fundamentally differently, but I'm actually going to go by contemporary card rules, that being starters, superior extenders, additional extenders, defense, and then the engine requirements. These terms definitely get thrown around quite a lot, but I don't see them used that often in deck profiles and context. And since I don't tend to normally go in order of monster spells and traps anyways, if you guys have looked at my other deck profiles in the past, I don't really see a reason to not do this. So we're going to try and break the mold a little bit and do it in a way that makes the most sense, in my opinion. So I'm just going to be a bit more explicit this time around. So the first off is going to be the starters, and the very first card to automatically include is Reinforcement of the Army. Very self-explanatory, just as any Phantom Knight, not a whole lot to say there. And then there's another starter that you might think is an auto-include, but surprisingly, I'm actually not going to be playing it. So that is going to be Foolish Burial. Now, this might seem like a very easy choice. It just sends any Phantom Knight to help get your engine started, which is good. But you'll find as you play with this deck that because you have cards like Cherubini and Torn Scales and Rusty that all do very much selective milling and get you to where you need to be, particularly Cherubini because that card sends for cost, you find that a lot of the time this card actually just gets you redundant access to the same cards. And it's true that that can maybe help in spots where you're trying to play around certain disruptions, but a lot of the time, really, like this card could just be another level 3 extender to where if they stop, for example, your normal summon, you can just get into Cherubini, and because that card is super good at just setting up your graveyard anyways, this card really just becomes superfluous a lot of the time. So even though it is a very strong starter card, you actually would rather this be just a card that gets you an additional body in the process of you getting to your graveyard setup as well. So that's the reason we're actually not going to be playing Foolish Burial. But the next strong starter card is going to be not a PK actually, but Tour Guide from the Underworld. So this card is obviously very good at getting you additional bodies on the board. The entire purpose of it is to, of course, fund the very small BA package. So effectively, it represents 3 link materials in the long run just by itself. And this card is the single most powerful normal summon, albeit susceptible. The best thing about this format in particular is that cards like Imperm, Gamma, and Valor are dropping off a little bit in popularity. Gamma may be a little bit less so, especially on like DB rated, but in the larger context of the metagame, Imperm and Valor are quite weak compared to last format. So this card is going to resolve a lot more often, and that's very, very good. So that's something to keep in mind, is that this card is really, really nice to have. It's also a super good follow-up play because of a certain card that we're going to be playing a bit later. But yeah, this card is one of the best cards to, by itself, facilitate an entire combo. The other card that can get you to a combo all by itself is going to be the Phantom Knights of Torn Scales. So this card is part of the Phantom Knight package, of course, but it's the only Phantom Knight in the lineup that by itself can get you to a very, very strong play. There are instances where maybe you can open things like Boots or Cloak, and if you're playing Salmon Almirage, which, spoiler alert, we are going to be playing, you can get somewhere, but this is the only one where you can really just get the entire engine rolling and get access to almost all of your other PK names, provided, of course, you get uninterrupted. So these 7 cards are actually the only real starters that I would consider to be in the deck, but that's because this deck plays a lot of extenders, so we will now get into the superior extenders. So first, we got 3 copies of Kagemucha Knight. This one is the one that allows you to make your tour guide safe from Ash, which is the only kind of real remaining stop to this card in the form of a hand trap, which is nice. So that's really, really good. This card also just works with pretty much any of your normal summons, even if it's not one of these 6, or I guess 7 if you count the Rhoda, because effectively it can make a hand that has, say, just one of the other PK names into a stronger combo, because if you open like any PK name with a level 3 extender, it's not going to be as strong as Torrent Scale, but it still is going to facilitate you enough ways to access your PK lineup, and that's why this card is really, really strong. So it's also a dark, which helps make the Rusty in cases where that comes up. Next is going to be the Psychic package. So we're going to be playing a Psychic Wielder as well as Psychic Tracker, and then we're going to be pairing that with a copy of Emergency Teleport. So this package allows you to kind of just get free bodies on the board. It's nice because they don't start a chain, so your opponent really doesn't have a great way to interact with these. And they are just free advantage, or not advantage necessarily, but they just help you get to where you need to be, which is ultimately going to accrue your advantage in the long run. Really, if you just draw combinations of these cards, you're going to be able to be in a good spot. And the more extenders you draw, if you draw one of your starter cards, the better you'll be able to play through various disruptions. So just having more of these while being different names, because they are once per turns, is going to allow you to really just have more options when you're trying to navigate various board states. And then the next extenders are going to be the dangers, actually. So we're going to be playing one of the level 3s a piece, being Jackalope as well as the Tsuchinoko. So these are great to pitch off of things like Nightmares or Torrent Scales, which is nice, but they also allow you to just guarantee a level 3 summon. I don't generally like these as much as the Psychics personally, because they introduce a little bit more variance. That being, they can, of course, heighten your ceiling even further if you open well enough, but they can also make some hands clunky where, like, if they are your only option and you don't want to pitch various cards, like, for example, if you drew different like hand traps or non-engine cards, it can get a little bit wonky at times, but those scenarios don't come up as much, so it still is definitely worthwhile to include these, especially because I am actually playing a higher card count than is normal, that being I'm playing more than 40 cards, so just any amount of level 3 extenders is going to be useful. So next we're going to go into the remainder of the Phantom Knight cards, and then the last of the superior extenders, which is going to be actually a copy, or 3 copies rather, of the Phantom Knights of Silent Boots. So this card, I kind of hesitate to call it a superior extender, but it is one, simply because you do want to draw it, and drawing it allows you to kind of have more flexibility with your other PK cards, because oftentimes if you, for example, start up with like Torrent Scales, you'll be milling a copy of Cloak to get your boots to hand, and that's how you start your combos. But if you draw this, then it opens up the door to kind of just use your searches in other ways where you can get some of your more additional extenders, and that is why this card is really good. This card is hardly ever dead as long as you are able to play the game, because if you start off your engine either with like hard opening Phantom Knight cards, or you just later on end up getting to Rusty by some other means, this is just going to be live. So of course you just want to have access to this, and it contributes to your grind game, because you are just going to be able to search Fog Blades at just forever basically. So very, very good, and that is going to round out the superior extenders. So next up are going to be the additional extenders. So we're going to start with 2 copies of the Phantom Knights of Ancient Cloak. This is arguably even cuttable to 1, but I do like having just PK names hard drawn, because the earlier you can kind of cycle these into the graveyard, the more options you have, and the harder it is for your opponent to actually hand trap you or just disrupt you in general. So this one allows you to get access to a lot of your other plays. So it's not really a play most of the time by itself, unless if you really don't have much else to do besides just go into Verite Anaconda by using Almirage and stuff, right? But if you are able to go into the rest of your combo, then this card allows you to help extend, and that is what its primary role is. So it's not the greatest to draw, but again, if you want to kind of pair it with like these other cards here, like basically all the other extenders, drawing this is probably the best one of the additional extenders to draw, because it still has utility in that it becomes an extender as soon as it hits the graveyard, right? So that is why we're playing that. Similarly, we also have the Fair Knights of Ragged Gloves. This card doesn't provide an immediate extender to hand in the same way that Cloak does, but it gets you to be able to put the traps in grave, or it can just help you, get to Cloak, which can help you add something to hand. So this is like a roundabout way of getting to whatever you need. So it is another name, and it allows you to help cycle through whatever you basically are missing. And this is generally not as strong by itself as Ancient Cloak, but again, because it can send Ancient Cloak, you're generally going to get to the same places anyways, so the difference is almost negligible at that point. This card also helps you play through Dragoon, or not Dragoon, sorry, through Nibiru, because if you are able to get into a position where you actually send this off your Cherubini, and then you summon your Rusty, basically if your opponent has Nibiru, and they don't Nibiru you there, you're going to resolve Rusty or not on summon, but like after that window. But if they do decide to Nibiru you, and then you have this in graveyard, you're basically going to be able to send one of the traps and then reborn your Rusty and then keep playing anyways. So this is some nice insurance, and it's really good to have as an option. It basically helps connect the last missing pieces together when you are trying to build your end board, because you'll either oftentimes, if you're like not starting out with Torrent Scale, you can send it later on in the combo if you access it. Like say you start up with a Torgai combo, that's like one of the ways you can use it. Or if you do happen to start it off with like a Torrent Scale, you can like send it off Rusty and do things that way. So obviously this card is a very, very strong additional extender. And then the last one for the PK monsters is actually going to be a single copy of the Fair Knights of Staingreaves. So this is one that I wasn't actually initially playing, but it actually is a super nice inclusion due to the fact that it gives your Ancient Cloak a bit more options to work with. The graveyard effect can come up sometimes, but you're primarily going to be using it to have just another level 3 body. It can also turn itself into level 4 sometimes, which is relevant due to the fact that you can overlay with one of your PKs that you bring back off your Break Sword or like a Shade Brigandine, and you can go for rank 4 plays if the matchup calls for it. But this is just a good option. We talked about earlier, right, that if you have Boots hard drawn, it opens up your other PK toolbox to do other things, and this is one of those other options to where not only do you have this now just a free extender that you hard draw and don't have to search off your Cloak, for example, but if you search your Staingreaves off the Cloak, then it pairs super well with the boots that you already have, because obviously just going to special summon itself. So it's really nice as just kind of a way to fix those hands or raise your ceiling even higher than they are initially. This is probably the worst one to draw by itself if you don't have your other cards going, and if you get disrupted, then it definitely can hurt a bit. But it's not the focal point of the deck. It's one of the ways to kind of just use your PK tools to just have additional ways to kind of just play past your opponent's disruptions, right? So that is the purpose of having that there. And then finally, we have the PK traps. So we actually have a copy of Fair Knights of Shade Brigandine. This card is one that you commonly access throughout your combos if you're starting off with like a single card play, because this helps you get an additional body on board to be able to eventually turn to Verte Anaconda after you go for Link Spider. It also helps you go for, again, rank 4 plays if need be. Just a nice card overall. Something to know about this card is that if you are playing other trap cards in your list, whether it be in your main or side deck, things like maybe a Red Reboot, as it came up in one of my games in the Roach 1000 Dual Big Rating series, or if you're playing Imperm for whatever reason, this definitely can be a bit of a conflict in those instances. Obviously, Imperm is much less common now, but just keep that in mind if you are citing maybe like other floodgates as well, or like just general traps. Just do keep them in mind that your graveyard has to be clear if you need to use this. So definitely don't forget about that. But the final extender is going to be a copy of the Fair Knight's Wing, or the final extender, I should say, for the PK lineup. So this card is nice because what it allows you to do is actually have an additional reborn type effect, because it banishes itself from the graveyard to reborn a PK similar to like Fogblade. Of course, the Fogblade and all the traps are hard ones per turn, so having the extra name there is nice because it just allows you flexibility to just have duplicate reborns if you need to. So it extends the ceiling of your deck, especially when you're going second and want to have as many extenders as possible to just go for game. But more importantly, if you watch some of my games, you'll notice that this card, as well as just having the Fogblade going second against trap decks, is really, really nice to have, because if you pitch it off Torrent Scale or get into the graveyard, it can help dodge things like Ice Dragon's Prison, or like Nail Shadal Aerial, or Wakero, the Golden Land. Like all these cards that basically just try and remove various resources in your graveyard. It's chainable because obviously it's a trap effect. So it's really nice to just be able to have some insurance there. And using this card, like pitching it or sending it to graveyard, or even pitching Fog Blade is like super necessary in a lot of cases. So definitely be sure to be aware of that as a potential line of play at your disposal. And then next, for the last of the extenders, is going to be basically the BA package. So we're playing a copy of Graph, if I can find it. I'm playing a copy of Graph and a copy of Seer. And I was initially playing a copy of Libic because these cards are actually kind of the garnets to draw, right? Because if you draw them, then it makes your Cherubini much, much worse. But if you draw one of these and you send Libic instead, then you just summon these out of hand and you're good to go. It only is unfortunate if you draw, both of these or, this in tandem with like your Libic. But, sometimes things like that happen. However, what I noticed actually, and what one of the commentaries pointed out to me is that you can actually replace the Libic with a copy of Ejim Sabers, because this card does functionally very similar things in that, it puts these back into the deck. So like you would summon them off of the tour guide instead, or you summon the Sabers off the tour guide rather, and then you're going to just stack whichever BA that you draw, and what that allows you to do is just continue your combo as if nothing happened. And the cool thing is that Sabers doesn't actually like banish itself when it uses its own graveyard effect. So it is just a free extender turn after turn, which is what I alluded to earlier when I said that tour guide becomes a great follow-up play, is that even if you like burn through your BAs in your first earlier combo, but then you happen to like maybe top deck a tour guide, or you just have one in hand that you're reserving for next turn, just getting Sabers represents just more link material than you would have had previously, so that's really, really nice to have access to. So I really do like this card. Also because we are playing the Dragoon package, this will really help recycle those pesky bricks, particularly the Red Eyes Fusion, where you have otherwise not really any means of reliably getting it out of your hand. So I do like it for that purpose as well. So that is going to be it for the additional extenders. We can now move on into the defensive cards. So these are going to be largely hand traps and other flex spots that are interchangeable. Like you can change them based on what your format kind of depends on, or how the metagame shifts overall. But right now I'm playing 3 copies of Ash, 3 copies of Ghost Bell, 3 copies of Skullmeister for the hand traps. We can talk about the hand traps first. Yeah, so these I think are the best ones to play right now because they have wide coverage against the best decks. I'm going to actually be making a video quite soon covering why exactly, or what applications you can have of certain hand traps versus the metagame overall. But yeah, these just have a lot of versatility. They're not necessarily high impact hand traps, but you don't have to actually have game or turn ending hand traps. As long as they just slow your opponent down enough to where you can play. And that's what this deck really needs, right? Is that like you basically just slow your opponent down, and then you have a very good engine that can start very easily with just 1 or 2 cards, and then you're just good to go. So these are good against Drytron, good against Eldritch, good against Virtual World as well. They all have some overlap across all these different matchups. So I really, really like these cards quite a lot this format. And then the other cards we are playing are 3 copies of Cosmic Cyclone. I like this card quite a lot because even though it's like not the greatest in all the matchups compared to these hand traps, it still has the ability for you to make your Eldritch matchup easier, and particularly sniping Wakero is good because that card can really hurt a lot if your opponent has it and you are not able to respond, or if you're unable to get one of your traps in your graveyard, then this is a really clutch card to be able to just chain to their Wakero and basically nullify it. Additionally, it has interactions against Chuche in the Virtual World matchup, and it's against Drytron. It's kind of funny because it's not really that good, of course, but you can hit their Meteor against Drytron because even though obviously it's not going to negate it, it's going to banish it, and most builds only play 1, so you can actually punish people if like the situation calls for it. Like if you're going first and they try and play through your board and you have a Cosmic set, then that's like one of the ways you can really mess up their grind game. And obviously Drytron grinds really well, but this deck also grinds super well. So if you can get rid of like one of the best ways of grinding, then that could be an option that comes up. So it's not as universally applicable as these other cards, but that being said, I do think that Cosmic is a very strong card in this current format. Next is going to be a defensive card that helps kind of also provide some offense in that it secures your plays, and that's Call by the Grave. Because these hand traps are also popular and they happen to be good against your deck, you really would like to be able to just kind of ensure your plays resolve. So that's one reason for it. It's also good against Eldritch, just banishing Lord is nice. Good against Drytron, banishing Benton is insane. Good against Virtual World, somewhat. It's not amazing against that deck, but it can help stop like Nian or whatever resource maybe they're trying to bring back off Lao if you have the read. So like it has some basic applications against every matchup. Even in like a control-oriented format, it's still pretty good. And then we're also playing 3 copies of Forbidden Droplet, if I can find it here. So this card is pretty interesting because in most decks, it's not good against like VFD against Virtual World, right? Because if they have Chuche, which most of the time they do, they're just going to Chuche pop their own VFD and you aren't able to really do a whole lot about it. But because we're playing 3 copies of Fogblade, as well as the Wings and the Hcabe Reed, you actually have a reasonable chance to open a trap alongside this. And even though it's like not a super common combination, it's enough to be relevant to where it can actually be enough to stop your opponent's VFD. And of course, you have a lot of high value cards to pitch, that being pretty much your PK lineup, or like your Edgem Sabers, or again, your PK traps. So it's really nice to be able to just shut that off. You also want an answer to Vanity's Ruler and the Herald of Ultimateness / Perfection in the Drytron matchup, because those cards can really also be a pain. It's pretty much completely dead against Eldritch, which is unfortunate. So this is the card that I would be the most inclined to swap out with something else if you are, if you were insistent on playing a different card or just slimming the deck count down in general. I wouldn't blame you for that. But this is overall still nice if you're looking to play against some of the best decks. And then finally, we got the Garnets. So we're going to be doing the engine requirements, that being the Dragoon package. So that's going to be this guy and the ultimate wizard in terms of attack and defense, with no monsters left in the field. You guys know the drill. This is Dragoon. Pretty self-explanatory. So that's going to be it for the main deck, and now we're going to move into the side deck. So first off, we got a copy of Cherubini because this is, of course, the centerpiece of your a lot of your plays. Not really too much to explain there. It stands for cost notably, so just remember that. Stands for cost. And the protection effect also comes up quite a lot. You'd be surprised, like people might try and Trident this or use like punishment or just some other removal. And if you have another card to help pair it with, that's really, really good. A cool interaction is, you saw it in one of the games, is that like I chain E-Telly, and then you can send the E-Telly itself to prevent this from being destroyed. You can use similar things with Shade Reading actually. So you can like set it, and then you can also just like protect and have it be fine that way. Or even cooler, you could set like a Wing or a Fogblade that you hard draw, and then use the protection effect there, and it not only gets this to stay on the board, but now you have a free extender in the graveyard as well. So these are some like cool little plays you can pick up that I actually learned as I was playing that I did not know previously. So that's really cool. Next, we got a copy of Rusty. This needs very little explanation. You're playing PK. I don't have anything to say about this card, honestly. This card is just what makes the deck run. Next, we got some other, just combo pieces. So we got the Verite Anaconda. This is relevant as well because it helps turn things into dark monsters, which helps you to make your Rusty to begin with. So if you have like maybe one of your psychics, it can come up, or if you have like Almirage, for example, that's also another one that you can turn into a dark monster to help, just immediately go into Rusty. It comes up very infrequently, but it is enough to kind of know because, say maybe you like opened week to where you opened like just Ancient Cloak and you went through like your Almirage play and you go like Verite Anaconda and then go for Dragoon. And like maybe next turn, like if you survive, you can like normal a hand trap, turn it into a dark monster, and then make Rusty. Those plays can come up. So it's definitely useful to have those up your sleeve, if you will. And then Almirage is there to kind of just turn your clunky PK hands that are not named Tornscale into somewhat of a play. It's not going to be an amazing one, but it'll be enough to hopefully allow you to survive. Speaking of Link ones that allow you to play the game, Link Spider is one. This allows you to turn your Shade Ringdean into an effect monster, and that comes up in cases where you can't afford to deviate or you get hand trapped or things along those lines. Really helps out there. And then we also have now just some utility stuff. So we have Masquerena, which is another Dark Link 2 that is fairly generic, so helps you to kind of ladder up into Rusty if needed. It's also a solid interruption if you want to go into it after you go for the Break Sword, pop it with the Rusty play. That's like a viable thing to end on, because if you were going to be ending on the Verite Anaconda anyway, then you might as well use it with the Masquerena to go into an interruption on your opponent's turn. Some of the options there would include the Nightmare package, being the... Oh, I typed in Knight instead of Nightmare, and I was actually about to scroll through all of those dueling book cards. But it's going to be Phoenix and Unicorn. I would like to play Cerberus just because that card is nice to punish players who put Zeus in the main monster zone still, but unfortunately not enough space. Space is actually surprisingly kind of tight. So that is going to be the Nightmare package. You can also go into Appaloosa with IP, or you can just hard make the Appaloosa on your own turn, which comes up quite a lot. This is just insurance against hand traps. It's good against Drytron. It's good against Virtual World as well. So very, very strong card to end on. And then finally, the card to end games is Access Code Talker. You could play Borosword if you wanted to. We are playing a lot of Darks, but we're also playing many different attributes. You're oftentimes going to have the Link Spider in your graveyard, and then if you ladder up into this via your Nightmares, being Phoenix notably, you'll have more sort of attributes to work with. So this is generally fine. I don't feel that Borosword is necessary because you have so much aggression anyways. You could do battle phase tricks like Follow Blade in the battle phase to bring back like a Break Sword, for example, and get an extra 2k damage in. So these are all really, really, really good. They all come up for sure. And then we have Xyz monsters. So we have Levier, the Sea Dragon, which is really, really integral to a lot of combos, and notably your grind game as well. Because if you don't combo with this card, then you're going to find that a lot of your PKs just get banished and you have no more access to them. So this card is like just a really good way to ensure that not only you get back your banished resources, but you help your PKs from getting banished to begin with. Because a lot of the times if you're bringing like Torrent Scale off its own effect, or you revive your PKs via your Fog Blade or your Wings, they will get banished. So this is a good prevention method for that. Next up is 2 copies of Break Sword. You need the first one absolutely for sure to get it into the graveyard off your Rusty place. So you have an interruption on your opponent's turn via banishing like Fog Blade or Wings to bring it back to the Rusty zone. And the second one's there to help clean up weakened board states. And then we also have Evil Swarm Nightmare. This is a card that is probably actually the most cuttable, even though like it's really, really good against a lot of the decks right now. You could easily make Appaloosa in a lot of those cases, or you can like just go IP. So this is an option that comes up a little bit more infrequently. I do like this card personally. I'm just kind of personally biased towards it. But that being said, it still is a very strong option against the combo-centric decks, so definitely would not sleep on it. And then finally, the last card is unsurprisingly this big dumb idiot, this guy right here, the Dragoon. So that is it for the extra deck. I can now talk a little bit about some things I was considering playing or things that you might want to play. So first, it's going to be a lot of the extra deck stuff actually. So first is going to be, if I can figure out, yeah, it's Raiders Knight. So yeah, this is the one that you can use to either ladder up into like your Arc Rebellion, or you can play like Dark Requiem with like the Dark Rebellion stuff, and you can play like the rank up magic spell. You can play all of these different cards. Oops. These are all options you can play. This also can help ladder down, notably. So you can rank back down into the Break Sword, which is cool. Like there's like interesting things you can do with this card, and like these cards are all neat. But I find that like this card breaks harder than a lot of the other cards in the deck. Like even if you draw a wing, it still is fine because all the time you're getting access to Torrent Scale, and pitching this just gets you a free extender. Just because of by virtue of it being in graveyard. Whereas this, like you have to be going for the entire full combo and get uninterrupted, which can happen because the deck is good at playing through disruptions for sure. But I just feel like a lot of the times it's not guaranteed that you're going to be able to get to this point, and then there are times where you just reckon it as well. So because I value just like the other plays over this, I decided to not incorporate it, but it's an option to consider if you guys are interested in playing that. Other things, you can play more level 3 extenders, so I thought about playing stuff like Junk Forward. I thought about playing things like even Gillosaurus, even though that card is questionable to play right now. But yeah, just more level 3 bodies. Like if you want diversity, that's good because again, a lot of stuff is just once per turn. This isn't necessarily once per turn, but functionally just because of the way it works, it is. It's fine. I think that it's okay. But because I am citing Nibiru, which I will talk about later, this can come up in those instances. Like I like to kind of just account for those small interactions there as well. So that's why I ultimately like didn't play this one. But it's an option. You can play like more extenders as well. But apart from that, there's not a whole ton I would really change too much. I already talked about Nightmare Cerberus. I would like to play this card because of the fact that it's good against, again, just people who are not careful around it. Another card to maybe consider is the card that Drytron is playing, which is Geonated Transverser. This card also is good. Another card actually that I was testing was Zeus, because obviously you're playing Xyz monsters. It is kind of rare for you to actually attack with these though, simply because like you're using Levy to combo and you're oftentimes going to link stuff away. Similarly, like the break sword, like it could stick and it's true, but a lot of the times, like if you're entering the battle phase, you're likely going to end the game right there. But that being said, like it can come up in niche scenarios, so it's worth testing at least. I didn't personally think it was needed, but you guys might think otherwise, so I will leave that up to you to decide. And I'm trying to think if there's anything else that I can think of that is a worthy inclusion. There's probably other cards for sure, and you guys can go ahead and ask in the comments if you have any particular questions. But we're now going to move on into the side deck. So the side deck is pretty much just geared to going second and trying to beat the best decks. So you have Lancia for mainly Virtual World, and then Dino, which can still pop up. We have Nibiru, which is the only card that's like mostly for like the rogue combo decks that can still be looking about, or things like maybe Prankid, stuff like that. This card's pretty decent against. We also have a Droll and Lockbird, which is there for mainly Drytron. Really need to stop Drytron from popping off. I do think that that is probably the best deck this format. And then we have just some generic Go Second cards and back row hate. So we got Pankratops, which I really love as a card. We have the Red Reboot. This deck is aggressive enough to where you can warrant playing this. Again, just be careful with the Shade Brigadier interaction. Then we have the Feather Duster, obviously for back row. And then we have Lightning Storm, which is a solid card, not only against back row, but also as a blindside. I keep missing the control button. But yeah, as a blindside against, if you don't know the matchup, like say your opponent scoops early, it's not a bad side in, just because like you want powerful cards going second, like maybe if they're on like Eldritch, or even if it happens to be like Drytron, if they're on like Vanity's Ruler and they don't put up anything else, then this just takes care of it, right? So not too bad there. But that's going to round out the side deck, and that's going to do it for the deck profile. So once again, guys, if you do have any questions, definitely feel free to run them by me in the comments down below. But this is just the culmination of the list, or lists that I've been playing. It's basically the same one that I've played for the last 2 episodes, I do believe. But I was pretty happy with the way this ended up turning out. I think, again, a lot of my losses could just be attributed to my own mistakes. So that's good. Like, I think the deck is strong. But, again, some of the weaknesses that are holding it back are just the way the format is developing. Just the graveyard hate really does hurt. And also, it's super hard to pilot. So I think that a lot of people are kind of put off from playing this deck maybe at like a really high competitive level. Because, again, just it gets super fatiguing, or that's not a word. It gets super tiring to play after 6, 7, 8 rounds, like an LCS or something, right? So that's like maybe another potential reason. But in a vacuum, this deck is really strong, and I wouldn't be surprised to see it continue to pop up here and there with various tops as the format continues to progress. But that's gonna do it for the video, guys. Thank you so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed. If you did, be sure to leave a like as well as any thoughts or feedback in the comments. Subscribe for more informative and competitive video content. If you want to, you can follow me on all social media platforms or support me via Patreon, TCG Player, all the links in the description as usual. And until next time, I'll catch you in the next video. See you guys.